first days were the most chaotic. Given everything that happened that night, my reaction was to panic when I woke up. I was far from home, far enough that I couldn't determine if I was still in the same region. Although I was too weak to move, I dedicated every ounce of energy to finding an escape. The last thing I could remember was being attacked by people. For all I knew at that moment, I could be a victim of human trafficking. The fact that there was no one around gave me the courage to try my luck. I knew I had to explore every alternative I had, as it didn't matter anymore if I was caught by those people. The result would be the same, or perhaps even worse, if I did nothing. With that said, I rushed toward the entrance door. It was getting dark, the sun barely hanging onto the clouds accompanying it. Weak as I was, I managed to continue my way through the forest surrounding the house I had left. I had to thank the adrenaline that made my heart beat like after 2 cups of coffee. I didn't even notice that the stones and branches on the ground were piercing my feet, as I didn't bother to look for something to wear. The autumn wind's chill didn't improve things at all. As I leaned on trees in my escape, one of the first things I realized was the temperature difference. It was true that the cold season was approaching, but I had never felt so cold. I began to wonder if my panic or shivering was to blame. Unfortunately, I didn't have much time to think about all the possibilities. A voice started calling me.
Wait, girl.
It was clear that I needed to quicken my pace if I intended to escape with my life. I started crying as I gained more wounds from the vegetation. To make everything worse, I eventually lost my balance, falling to the ground as the hurried steps of the one following me approached rapidly. For a moment, I wondered if I had any way to end my life before becoming an object. I looked around, trying to find a solution, but it was too late. The man reached me. "Leave me alone!" I started shouting, making the forest echo with the sound of my voice.
Calm down,
he replied, keeping a distance of 1 or 2 meters between us. However, my instincts continued to make me react like a trapped animal. I cried hysterically, trying to throw anything I could find to defend myself. All this time, the man hadn't moved, and he seemed to be waiting. "What do you want from me? Where am I?" My screams were not as strong anymore. I had exhausted all my energy, making my words increasingly hoarse. Finally, the man answered.
Cassie, listen to me. I know you're scared and don't understand what's happening. I've been through something similar before, but you need to understand that you're not in danger now.
What was this man talking about? I was in a strange place. Darkness was falling, and I had an unfamiliar person in front of me, dressed as if he had stepped out of a book written 200 years ago. Nevertheless, his tone managed to calm me a little. I still had no idea what he wanted from me, but at least he hadn't harmed me. So, trembling and scared as I was, I gathered the courage to ask him a question. "Were you there? When I was attacked, were you with them?" I prayed silently for him to say no.
I was there,
he replied, making me lose the last shred of hope. He looked at me carefully in the eyes, as if waiting to see my reaction. When I started to cry again, he continued.
Thanks to me, you're still alive. I killed all those who attacked you that night.
He stood up, turning his back to me. It took me a few moments to calm down, after which I continued with my questions. "So, why am I here? Why didn't you leave me there, or—" He had no intention of letting me finish what I had to say.
Because they were looking for you for the same reason I was. There's too much to explain, but it seems you're a bit underdressed for this conversation outside.
I hadn't even noticed the clothes I was wearing. I looked at them, unable to recognize them. These don't even belong to me. The man didn't hesitate to answer.
I know, they're mine. I apologize for their size. It's all I had available.
His answer made me realize another thing, something that sent shivers down my spine out of fear and embarrassment. "You changed my clothes?" I was afraid of his answer. A part of me already knew it, but I still held on to the hope that he'd say otherwise.
Yes, I did. I'll ask you not to mistake me for some dishonorable or unscrupulous degenerate, as I know the world is full of them these days. I changed your clothes because you were covered in blood, and I needed to check if you had other wounds.
Despite the cold way he delivered his answer, it inspired some trust in the way he explained things. It was atypical in a good sense. I knew nothing about him, so I chose to rely on everything he said. After all, if he was one of the bad guys, I probably would have woken up tied up. Or maybe I wouldn't have woken up at all. Eventually, he turned to me, extending his hand carefully.
So, we're going to freeze here together, or do you agree to go inside?
I hesitated for a moment, but I had no choice. After all, what could I do in my current state? Wander alone through the forest? No. I had to be calculated. After all, he said he was looking for me, which kept me tense. As we walked back to his cabin, I decided to try to learn more about him. Can I ask you something?
You already did.
He replied in a sarcastic tone. I wrinkled my nose a bit, then tried again. What's your name? He decided to respond with another question.
Does it really matter?
He didn't seem to like questions about himself. It matters if you want to gain my trust. Since you brought me here, I imagine there is a reason to it. In the end, he relented, answering without looking at me.
My name is Alexander.
His answer was somewhat dry, but I understood that he wasn't the type to be very open. Eventually, we were back in his little cabin. The first thing he did was put 2 more logs on the fire while I sat on a nearby chair. I did my best to stay conscious. Even though I managed to have that conversation with him, I felt like I was going to faint at any moment. After making sure the fire was burning properly, he took a few steps toward me, sitting on one knee. What are you doing? I asked, becoming more dizzy.
Making sure you're okay.
He replied as he checked my feet.
I apologize if it will hurt a little, but I can't leave you with these splinters.
He removed them carefully, then stood up and took my hand.
The wrist will stay bandaged for another day or 2. The cut was quite deep, and I don't want you to lose more blood.
With the last bit of strength, I thanked him, and then I felt myself falling backward. Everything went dark in a second. I don't even know if I fell off the chair. The only thing certain was that if I collapsed, I didn't feel anything. I was far from being well, but at least I had some assurance that I wasn't in the worst hands I could have ended up in.
Her condition was a full-blown dilemma. The wound should have healed faster if she were more than an ordinary human. Runes don't lie, after all. Could she have been a mere victim, and we rushed blindly to find her? Could it be poison? It would have presented complications if that were the case. These were my thoughts throughout the time spent waiting for her to recover. It wasn't simple. One of those books surely had a connection to what was happening. I was familiar enough with the cultists' curses, but even so, I couldn't dismiss the possibility that they somehow stalled her awakening. Surely the event that would make her one of mine hadn't occurred yet. Otherwise, the runes would have had much greater intensity. I needed to prepare for the most dangerous scenario, to be ready to confront her in case she woke up during this period. For a minute, I forgot what my objective was. I involuntarily humanized her. It seemed that despite my purpose in this whole story, it was hard for me to see her as I should. I had a duty not to get too accustomed to her. After all, my mission was entirely different. The fact that I saved her and took care of her was just a means to an end. After a moment of contemplation, I heard the door opening. I placed the book on the table next to the chair where I sat. Cassie, you shouldn't be up. She seemed to have more color in her cheeks. A full day of rest seemed to have done her good.
I've been lying in bed like a vegetable. I thought a little movement would do me good.
She replied, frowning. I suppose you're right, but the amount of blood you lost might still make you feel dizzy. By the way, how's your wrist? I got closer to her as she raised her hand, pointing to the blood-stained bandage. I carefully unwrapped the cloth around the wound.
What is it?
She asked, probably noticing my sudden change in demeanor. This was expected, I replied. Despite the fact that the wound is still open, you're not bleeding anymore. I had to be very sure of my theory before proceeding. I want you to do something, but you have to trust me, okay? I told her, carefully examining the cut. I could tell she was afraid just by her expression, so I decided to proceed without informing her. You need to close your eyes for a few moments, that's all.
Okay.
She replied, increasingly hesitant. I pricked one of her fingers with a needle, expecting a drop of blood to fall on the floor.
Why did you do that?
She asked, pulling her hand back abruptly. Relax, it's an insignificant amount compared to what you've already lost. I was right. She was just like me. All done, you can pinch the prick if you want. Nothing will come out of it anyway, I continued, increasingly relieved that I hadn't been wrong. It was quite amusing to see her puzzled expression. She touched her wound with her fingers, and after confirming that I was right, she asked what was happening. I decided to explain the situation, carefully weaving the details. We both have a common affliction, let's call it that. Tell me, how old are you? She hesitated for a moment before answering.
19. I'm 19 years old.
It was a reasonable age for this to happen. All right. Now tell me, please, how old do you think I am? She measured me from head to toe before offering her answer.
Well, judging by how you look, you seem to be around 23.
There was a short pause before she broke the silence.
Am I right?
You're close. You just need to add a 0 at the end. I watched as she took a step back, unsure of what to believe. Honestly, I understood her. Perhaps if she were just a normal or more impulsive person, she would have tried to attack me at that moment, but she remained surprisingly calm. Maybe she was genuinely making an effort not to panic, or she simply thought I was crazy.
What do you mean by that? Where have you seen people living for more than a century, at best?
I chose to respond with a question. True, humans can't. But what about those who have lost their humanity? My cryptic way of phrasing things seemed to puzzle her.
What are you talking about?
A person who is no longer human, that's what I'm talking about. Do you think it's impossible to live for more than 100 years if what makes you human is altered? She paused again, probably reflecting on the proposed idea.
Well?
Just before she replied, I took one of my knives and cut my finger without hesitation. She gave me a puzzled look as she flinched. She probably thought I was going to stab her initially.
You're not bleeding at all, but I've never heard of such an illness. It's madness,
she said, unsure of how to react. In time, you will come to realize that the only truly insane thing is the concept that there is a sane person in the world. The world is darker than you ever thought it was. Once you find out what people are truly like, you'll begin to realize that you're on your own. I paused for a moment, trying not to sound too extreme. But then again, you can't be sure of that either. In the end, you're just like me. Neither of us is truly alone. She abruptly interrupted my monologue.
You do realize I don't intend to stay around here much longer, I assume? I don't even know where I am. I need to go home. God, my parents must be incredibly worried.
My intervention was as abrupt as hers. And so what? Do you think they would understand?
What is there to understand? Do you really think all of this is some kind of biological immortality? And people will burn me at the stake?
My cynical side got the best of me for a moment. At the stake? No way. First, you'll be arrested, and you'll probably be kept in a hidden laboratory while they perform dozens of tests, each more painful, to determine what makes you different. Come to think of it, I'd prefer the stake if I were you. She stared into my eyes. I decided to continue. And yet, we can't bleed from such wounds, Cassie. Think about it for a moment. Don't you think that's a pretty good sign that you don't belong in the place you were until now? What reasonable explanation could there be for that? Doesn't it seem more plausible that the answer is of a divine nature?
Maybe it's some kind of blood clotting or something.
I couldn't help but laugh a little, remembering my first assumption when I faced this dilemma. I'm so glad you never thought of becoming a physician, medic, as you call them nowadays. As if I hadn't thought of the same thing back when I found out the truth.
And even if it's something else, what should we do?
We find a way. Find those responsible for this.
And then what? Kill them?
An eye for an eye. They are nothing more than madmen killing innocent people. I had to carefully measure my words if I were to convince her. Perhaps the thought of suddenly being immortal doesn't sound so bad, but what they've done to us is worse than death. She looked at me again, surprised by my attitude.
Wait, what do you mean exactly by us? Are you also one of their victims?
Poor thing. If only she knew. Yes, I, like you, was attacked some time ago. Not by the same group, obviously, but by their ancestors. This affliction we both have was created by them. That's my theory. I've been fighting them on my own for as long as I can remember, taking them down one by one, but I couldn't do much on my own. Now that you're here, you can help me. All this time hasn't been wasted after all. I paused to give her a chance to speak. She continued to stay silent, prompting me to continue with my idea. Don't you understand? You and I have the means to put an end to something that has corrupted this world for centuries. Moreover, if you go back and they find you again, knowing that it worked, they'll do anything to get to you. Right now, they're focused on finding you. So far, you've been some sort of experiment, but what do you think will happen to your parents when they decide to come after you? Now that you are a success in their eyes, they won't knock on the door, that's for sure. Her eyes widened, suddenly threatening to tear up.
So, I can't live a normal life anymore. If I were to go back now, it would raise too many questions. If someone noticed that I don't age, as you mentioned earlier, then...
Exactly. Then you would have to constantly move from one place to another in order to prevent people from noticing that your body no longer changes. You can choose either this kind of life, being forced to abandon your friends and family for good, or you can help me find the answers I seek, and let's hope we find something that could cure us. I looked her in the eyes. So, will you follow me? I saw her beginning to lose her balance.
Give me a moment. I feel weak.
She was on the verge of collapsing, but I managed to catch her and quickly led her to her room. It was a tiring period for both of us, that's for sure. She had a lot to learn, and if there was any hope of stopping them, then the two of us had to stay together and fight. I had to teach her to control what was inside her, because the ability to heal faster and biological immortality both came at a great cost. She and I, both of us had entities tied to our souls that granted us the unusual abilities we possessed. It was both a curse and a blessing. The situation we were facing was one she wasn't mentally prepared for. Yet. That's why for now I had to make her feel as if the attachment she felt towards me seemed natural. She risked literally losing her mind due to the contradictions she was predisposed to, as there was no logical reason from her perspective for her to feel as if she were with a member of her family. All I could do was let her take the steps towards me on her own and let the rest come naturally. Who knows? Maybe one day she would discover memories she didn't even know she had. Memories of someone else. Our memories. I stayed beside her, making sure she was okay until darkness fell. I quietly went out the door and looked at the fire in the living room as I lay down on the sofa. I continued to watch the flames, listening to the crackle of the wood as I relaxed, letting myself dream of the bygone days I cherished so much.